Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to being well-informed, packed with surprising facts and just enough humor to keep you hooked. Today, we're taking a deep dive into 8 fascinating sources, covering everything from, well, the very origins of life to current policy debates and cultural icons. We're aiming to give you the most important nuggets of knowledge from today's stack. Let's jump right in with a truly fundamental question. How did life actually begin on early Earth? Our first source is from Nature Physics. It proposes this really intriguing idea. What if simple rock cracks, just warmed by a bit of heat, were enough to kickstart complex life, maybe even protein synthesis?
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. Digging into the study, the core concept is really compelling. They suggest that in a tiny water-filled crack, if you have a temperature difference, one side warm, one side cool, you get these gentle, natural loops of liquid. Warm water rises, cool water sinks. But the key thing is, many dissolved molecules, like the building blocks for life, they tend to drift towards the cooler side. So this natural flow can effectively sweep up and concentrate molecules in one spot, almost like a tiny natural centrifuge.
That's a really neat physical mechanism. So how do they actually test this in the lab? It sounds tricky.
Well, they built these miniature chambers to mimic those rock cracks. And they set up a specific temperature difference, one side clearly warmer than the other, about 40 Celsius top, 27 bottom. Then they put in a highly diluted, cell-free protein synthesis kit. Now, what that is, basically, it's all the biological machinery, DNA, amino acids, everything needed to make proteins, but just in a test tube outside a living cell. They diluted it so much it was basically inactive to start with, couldn't make proteins on its own. And to see if anything happened, they added DNA that codes for a glowing protein, GFP, like a little light bulb signaling success.
Okay, so you've got this inactive soup of life's ingredients in a tiny chamber with a warm top and a cool bottom. What happened?
The results were pretty remarkable, actually. They saw this significant buildup of the glowing GFP protein in the cooler bottom layer. We're talking about 25 times more than at the top. And crucially, essential ions like magnesium, potassium, and phosphate also concentrated dramatically down there by factors of, let me check, 30 for magnesium, 7 for potassium, and a huge 70 times for phosphate. DNA, RNA building blocks, amino acids, they all got pulled into that cooler zone. And here's the kicker. Once these molecules were sufficiently crowded together, that previously inactive mix just switched on. It started churning out the GFP protein, but only in the chamber that had the temperature difference.
Wow. So the heat difference alone concentrated everything needed and turned on the process.
Exactly. And what's maybe even more surprising is that this simple setup showed what they termed membrane-like selectivity. It managed to trap over 95% of the protein it made in that cool zone while letting waste products diffuse away. All without any actual membrane, even with water flowing through the system. It's quite something.
So the implications are pretty big then. If this holds up, it suggests a really kind of elegant start for life. Just a warm rock crack could have gathered the necessary bits and started making proteins. Life didn't need to be complicated right away.
The potential implications are profound, yes. It offers a surprisingly simple physical way to organize molecules, which is, a fundamental step for life. But of course, there are caveats. Other experts have pointed out we need to check if natural temperature gradients back then would have lasted long enough, matching the experiment's timescale. And also, would all the different kinds of molecules needed for life behave this way? That still needs more investigation.
It definitely gives you pause for thought, doesn't it? How such seemingly simple conditions, a bit of heat, a crack, could potentially lay the groundwork for, well, everything that followed. Incredible. Okay, so from the dawn of life, let's shift forward quite a bit to another kind of origin story, one that might change how we think about ancient human societies. We're looking at another really intriguing scientific find. Evidence suggesting a matrilineal society existed in Neolithic China.
Yes, and what's really exciting here is how modern genetics is just revolutionizing our view of the past. This evidence comes from 2 Neolithic cemeteries over in Fujia, China. They date back around 4,750 to 4,500 years ago. The researchers used genetic analysis, specifically looking at mitochondrial DNA, mtDNA, which you only inherit from your mother, and the Y chromosome, which comes only from the father. This lets them trace direct maternal and paternal lines back through the generations buried there.
Right, so tracing the family lines. And what did they actually find in these cemeteries? What was the pattern?
Well, the pattern was really quite striking. They discovered that all the individuals buried within one cemetery shared the exact same type of mtDNA, suggesting a common female ancestor for everyone buried there. But the mtDNA type was different between the 2 cemeteries. Now contrast that with the male lineage. The Y chromosomes found within each cemetery were very diverse.
Okay, so same mother line within each cemetery, but different father lines. What does that tell us about how their society was organized?
It strongly suggests that burial practices and likely social structure were determined purely by matrilineal ties. You were buried with your mother's relatives, essentially. And when they looked at the rest of the genome, the broader genetic picture, they found something else fascinating. There was evidence of frequent intermarriage between the two groups, but usually between relatively distant relatives, like second or third cousins. They even found specific examples, like a pair identified as N01 and S32, who were related as either a paternal aunt and nephew or a niece and paternal uncle. Even these individuals were buried according to their maternal line based on their mtDNA. This consistency across individuals and generations really hammers home the point. Matrilineal kinship seems to have been the absolute core principle for them.
And they didn't just rely on genetics, did they? I think they also looked at isotopes.
That's right, they added another layer using isotope analysis. Strontium ratios in teeth and bones matched local plants, indicating these people lived their whole lives in that same area. And carbon isotopes showed their diet was mainly millet, corn, sorghum, and pigs. Importantly, both males and females had the same diet, so it gives you a really rounded picture of their lives.
So what's the big takeaway here? Why is this finding significant?
Well, the broader implication is that it really challenges the common assumption, that ancient societies, especially farming ones, were automatically patriarchal. It shows how diverse ancient social structures could be, and it's a fantastic example of how these advanced genomic and isotopic methods are just adding incredible depth to anthropology and archaeology, letting us uncover these hidden nuances of human history.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? How often we project our own society structures back onto the past. What else might we be missing by assuming things were always like they are now? A good reminder to keep an open mind about history.
Absolutely.
Now, speaking of shaping societies, let's pivot to a major contemporary policy issue in India. We are diving into the new Employment-Linked Incentive Scheme, or ELI. This is a pretty big deal, an outlay of almost 99,500 crore, aiming to create over 3.5 crore jobs, especially boosting the manufacturing sector.
Okay, so let's break down how it's supposed to work. For new employees earning up to 1 lakh a month, the idea is they get a payment equivalent to 1 month of their employee's Provident Fund, or EPF, wage. That's capped at $15,000, and it's paid out in 2 chunks, after 6 months and then 12 months on the job. And interestingly, a part of this actually goes into a savings instrument for the employee. Then for the companies themselves, if they're registered with the EPFO, that's the Employees Provident Fund organization, they get an incentive too. Up to $3,000 per month for 2 years for each additional employee they hire and keep employed. And there's an extension for manufacturing. They can get this incentive for a 3rd and 4th year as well.
Right, so incentives for both the new hire and the employer. How has the initial reaction been, particularly from businesses?
Well, generally positive from employers, yes. Many have called it a laudable initiative, something that could potentially reshape India's employment landscape. But there are already some caveats being voiced. For example, the Lagu Udyog Karati, representing small industries, they're saying the focus needs to be more on the micro and small units, not just the bigger players. They make up the vast majority of businesses, after all. And the Association of Indian Entrepreneurs, they've suggested maybe a simpler reimbursement model would be better, like a straightforward percentage of the salary paid monthly, easier to manage, perhaps broader reach.
Okay, so employers see potential but have suggestions. What about the trade unions? How are they viewing this scheme?
Well, that's where you see more significant skepticism. Most of the central trade unions, except for the Bharatiya Mazdoor Sangh, which is backed by the RSS, have questioned the scheme quite strongly. Their main concern seems to be that this is using workers' own Provident Fund money, managed by EPFO, to basically give incentives back to employers. They point to past schemes, like the production-linked incentive from 2020, and claim there was misuse funds ending up with big companies, some of whom were apparently even banned by EPFO later after investigations. So there's a trust issue there.
That's a serious concern. Are there other issues being raised too?
Yes, a couple of key ones. First, is the EPFO really the right body to implement this? Its main job is safeguarding employee savings. It doesn't actually hold government funds itself for this kind of reimbursement. So how will the reimbursement actually happen? That's unclear. And second, critics are asking, why isn't the government tackling the root causes, like the general economic slowdown, or trying to boost workers' purchasing power directly, instead of just focusing on these kinds of incentives?
So it highlights the tricky balancing act for governments, doesn't it? Trying to stimulate jobs without creating unintended problems or raising questions about fairness and how funds are used.
Exactly. It really underscores the complexities involved in designing and implementing large-scale economic incentives. You're trying to help employers hire, support employees, but you have to consider where the money comes from, who benefits most, and whether it's the most effective approach overall.
Definitely something for you, the listener, to think about. How can governments craft these schemes so they genuinely hit the mark for both sides, employers and employees, without these kinds of pitfalls? Right, let's move from economic policy to a very serious incident with major safety implications. Our next source looks at the tragic explosion at Scourge Industries in Telangana. The immediate facts are devastating. June 30th, 39 people lost their lives and a three-story building was just flattened.
Yeah, it's truly awful. To understand what might have happened, we need to look at what Scourge Industries makes. Their product is microcrystalline cellulose, basically. It's refined wood pulp processed into a very fine powder. It's used a lot in pharmaceuticals as a filler or binder in tablets because it's non-reactive. The strong suspicion is that the explosion was a dust explosion. This happens when a fine combustible powder like this gets dispersed in the air and finds an ignition source. It's different from, say, a chemical reactor blowing up or a BLE, a boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion, which the company and experts seem to have ruled out. There's historical precedent for dust explosions, think flour mills, grain elevators. The scale of the damage here, plus the material involved, really points towards that kind of event.
And what emerged immediately after the blast highlighted a major regulatory issue, didn't it?
It did, starkly. When the fire crews and emergency responders arrived, they apparently had no information about the specific materials inside the factory. Now, factories are legally required to display environmental data on green boards outside. These boards are crucial. They tell first responders about potential hazards, pollution risks, what they're dealing with. According to the source, these vital boards were either missing or completely inadequate at Scourge. This left the emergency teams essentially working blind in a very dangerous situation. A clear failure.
And the article points out this isn't just a one-off incident in the sector, unfortunately.
No, sadly, it connects this tragedy to a worrying pattern of serious accidents in Indian pharmaceutical companies, mentioning other recent fatalities in Sangretti and Anakapali. The broader implications here are huge, especially for India's pharma industry and particularly for Telangana, which is a massive hub. It accounts for, what, a third of India's pharma production, a fifth of exports, a third of global vaccine production. Huge numbers. Maintaining a strong safety record is absolutely vital for the Made in India brand and global market access, especially with agencies like the US FDA having such stringent standards. The source even mentions books like The Truth Pill and Bottle of Lies that have previously documented concerns about regulatory shortcuts and dangerous practices in parts of the Indian pharma industry.
And it's not just about accidents, is it? There are wider pollution concerns, too.
Definitely. The article highlights how sometimes lax zoning and regulations have led to industrial zones being very close to residential areas, creating direct risks for communities. And it specifically mentions the severe pollution of the Musi River, which flows through Hyderabad. It's apparently ranked 22nd globally for the concentration of active pharmaceutical ingredients. This pollution is directly linked to pharma manufacturing and inadequate wastewater treatment, and it's raising serious concerns about the rise of antimicrobial resistance, a major global health threat driven in part by this kind of environmental contamination.
So these accidents, they're more than just isolated events.
They're being framed as loud warning signs. The conclusion is that a much more robust and rigorously enforced regulatory framework is absolutely essential, not just for safety in the environment, but for India to actually capitalize on the huge economic potential of its pharmaceutical sector and ensure its future growth is sustainable.
It certainly makes you, the listener, consider that fundamental question. What's the real cost of rapid industrial growth if safety and environmental rules aren't treated with the seriousness they deserve? Okay, let's shift gears now to a different kind of tension. A cultural and political debate happening in Maharashtra over language in schools. This started when the state government initially ordered that Hindi be made mandatory as a third language, right from grade 1 in primary schools.
Yes, and that move immediately sparked pretty widespread opposition. You had regional linguistic groups, academics, prominent literary figures, all pushing back quite strongly. The resistance seemed to be based on two main points. First, the practical argument. Burdening very young children with learning 3 languages simultaneously is just too much. But second, and perhaps more significantly, was the perception of Hindi imposition. Many people saw it as a push towards cultural hegemony, or even part of a broader agenda some critics describe as Hindi, Hindu, Hindustan. Apparently, even the government's own appointed language committee had advised against making Hindi compulsory like this.
Right, so facing that pushback, the government tried to adjust the policy.
They did. They revised the order, making Hindi more of a general third language option. In theory, schools could offer other Indian languages instead. But, and this was the crucial part, that alternative was only possible if at least 20 students in that school specifically requested it. This revision didn't really placate anyone. In fact, it drew further backlash. Critics immediately said this was just trying to impose Hindi through the back door. They argued the 20-student minimum made the choice essentially meaningless in many schools, and again pointed out the state's own language committee wasn't consulted.
And this whole controversy actually caused some interesting shifts in the political landscape there, didn't it?
It really did. It gave a significant boost, a fillip, to Raj Thackeray's MNS party, the Maharashtra Navniran Sena. Their whole platform is built around Marathi Asmita, Marathi pride, and identity. It even led to this rare moment of unity where Raj Thackeray and his estranged cousin Uddhav Thackeray held a joint rally specifically to protest this language policy. And it wasn't just opposition parties. Even the Deputy Chief Minister, Ajit Pawar, who's part of the ruling coalition, publicly expressed his unhappiness. It shows just how sensitive this issue is across the political spectrum in Maharashtra.
So where does it stand now? The controversial orders are gone, right?
Yes, both those orders have been scrapped. Now, a new committee has been set up, headed by Dr. Narendra Jadhav, to basically re-examine the entire 3-language policy for the state. However, there's already controversy around this new committee, too. Questions are being raised about whether Dr. Jadhav has the right specific expertise in primary school education. And some groups are going further, calling for not just this committee to be scrapped, but the entire 3-language policy itself, at least in the early primary grades. They want a completely different approach.
It really highlights how deeply these language policies connect to fundamental issues of identity, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Cultural preservation, regional pride.
Absolutely. It's far more than just deciding which languages kids learn in school. It touches on these very core questions about linguistic identity and cultural belonging within an incredibly diverse multilingual country like India.
It leaves you, the listener, pondering. How do education policies around language end up reflecting and sometimes even inflaming these deeper societal and political tensions within a diverse nation? What's really at stake? Okay, let's dive into our next source, which tackles a major public health crisis that often flies under the radar. India's devastating snakebite problem. The article frames it as a snakebite scourge, and the numbers are just staggering. We're talking 58,000 deaths every year in India alone. That's nearly half the global total. It works out to about 6 deaths every single hour. And crucially, it's highlighted as largely a poor person's problem. It mainly impacts people in rural, low-income communities. The consequences go beyond death amputations, lifelong disabilities, crippling financial ruin for families. Plus, there's the added concern that climate change is likely to make this problem even worse as snake habitats shift.
Yeah, the scale is immense, and understanding it is complex. One major challenge highlighted is just getting accurate data. Many victims, sadly, die before they even reach a hospital, so their deaths aren't officially recorded as snake bites. And until very recently, snakebite wasn't even a notifiable disease in India, meaning there was no systematic requirement to report cases. This lack of data has historically led to the issue being somewhat invisibilized in public health planning. And this invisibility is tied directly to the victim's socioeconomic status. Because it predominantly affects the rural poor, it hasn't always received the same level of attention or funding as maybe other health issues affecting more urban or affluent populations.
And even when people do seek treatment, there are huge hurdles, right? Delays seem critical.
Absolutely critical. The article points to several reasons for delays. Lack of easily accessible healthcare facilities in remote areas is a big one. Then there's often poor availability of the correct antivenom at the local level. And a significant factor is the common practice, especially in rural areas, of first seeking help from traditional healers or quacks, which wastes precious time. There's a really vivid and tragic story in the article about a farmer in Kanchipuram bitten by a Russell's viper. Instead of going straight to a hospital, he went to a faith healer first. By the time he finally got proper medical attention, the venom had done too much damage. He was brain dead. It just starkly illustrates how critical immediate, correct treatment is.
So the standard treatment is antivenom, but even that has its own set of problems.
Yes, antivenom is the universal lifesaver, but it's far from perfect. It's still produced using a method that's over a century old, injecting horses with venom and harvesting their antibodies. This process means the resulting antivenom can cause severe allergic reactions in humans, including life-threatening anaphylaxis. This risk makes doctors, especially in smaller clinics without advanced support, hesitant to administer it unless absolutely necessary. Another major issue is that the common Big Four antivenom designed for the four most medically significant snakes, common krait, Indian cobra, Russell's viper, and saw-scaled viper, isn't uniformly effective across India. Why? Because snake venom composition can vary significantly by region. For instance, the venom of the saw-scaled viper in Rajasthan is known to be much more potent than the venom from the same species in Tamil Nadu, where a lot of the venom for antivenom production is sourced. So the standard antivenom might not work as well in Rajasthan. There are also concerns about quality control and venom collection. The article mentions the Arula tribe, who traditionally collect venom, sometimes don't follow strict WHO protocols. And crucially, most Indian antivenoms haven't undergone rigorous modern clinical trials to fully assess their efficacy and safety profile.
Wow, okay. So a deeply complex problem with challenges at every stage. Data, access, treatment itself. But the article does talk about new initiatives, right? There's some hope.
There definitely is. It's not all bleak. There's a growing momentum to tackle this. For example, new serpentariums are being set up, like the Liana Trust in Karnataka mentioned in the article. Their goal is to conduct much-needed research into anti-venom effectiveness against different regional venoms, and also study snake behavior to aid prevention. The article even mentions a detail about them reviving a viper by gently blowing into its mouth to clear anesthetic, shows the kind of hands-on work involved.
That's quite an image. What other solutions are emerging?
Well, several things are happening. India recently launched a national action plan called NAPSE. A key part of this was finally making snakebite a notifiable disease, which is crucial for getting better data. There is active research at top institutions like the Indian Institute of Science and Tezpur University to develop region-specific antivenoms addressing that venom variation problem directly. And perhaps most excitingly, there's cutting-edge work on new types of antivenoms using recombinant antibodies. The hope is to create a universal or at least pan-continental antivenom that would be effective against a wider range of venoms and have far fewer adverse reactions. That would be a game changer. They're also looking at repurposing existing oral drugs like varosplodib and merimostat. These wouldn't cure the bite, but they could potentially slow down the venom's effects, buying victims critical extra time to reach a hospital. And a rapid diagnostic test specifically for Russell's viper bites is also being developed.
And technology is chipping into. I think I saw something about an app.
Yes, the SARPA app in Kerala. It functions a bit like Uber or Lyft, but it connects people who find a snake with trained, certified snake rescuers in their area. It helps manage human-snake encounters safely and also collects valuable data on snake distribution and bite incidents.
So lots of different approaches are being tried.
Exactly. And while all these scientific and policy advancements are vital, the article also stresses that prevention through education and community awareness remains probably the single most effective strategy overall. Teaching people how to avoid bites, what to do if bitten, immediate first aid, getting to a hospital fast that saves lives.
It's a really comprehensive look at the issue. Despite the huge challenges, it sounds like there's finally real momentum building toward the WHO goal of having snakebite deaths by 2030. It shows how tackling something like this needs everything from high-tech science to grassroots education, right? And that fundamental need for human-snake coexistence. Definitely. Okay, for our next deep dive, we're shifting focus again, this time to history and memory, through the lens of Sam Dalrymple's book, Shattered Lands.
Yeah.
The book apparently explores the making of modern Asia by looking at the partitions that carved up the region. It highlights this dramatic change, a huge territory from Rangoon to Aden in 1928, breaking into 12 nations in less than 50 years.
Right, and one of the core ideas Dalrymple explores is this concept he calls historical amnesia, specifically how it plays out in the official state narratives across the subcontinent. The prime example he uses is the 1971 war, the one that led to Bangladesh's liberation. He points out how this single event is remembered and framed very differently in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. Each country tends to create a narrative that puts itself at the center, often downplaying or omitting uncomfortable aspects or the perspectives of others. For instance, in Pakistan, it's often referred to as the fall of Dhaka, or the dismemberment of the nation, sometimes without fully exploring the Bengali perspective and the reasons for secession. It's about how nations curate their past.
That makes sense, how national narratives get shaped. So given these potentially biased official histories, how important is oral history in Dalrymple's work for getting a fuller picture?
Oh, absolutely critical. He states that oral testimonies form a massive bedrock for the book. He actually conducted interviews in 8 different languages to capture these stories. The value is immense because oral history captures the experiences of ordinary people, often those who are non-literate, whose stories would never appear in government archives or official memoirs. They provide these incredibly vivid personal details the source mentions, recalling the exact color of a car during an escape, for example. Details that bring history to life in a way documents often can't. And crucially, these oral accounts help reconstruct the fabric of daily life before the partitions' descriptions of celebrating festivals like Diwali or Holi in areas that are now in Pakistan, for instance. It paints a picture of a shared past that archives alone just don't capture.
It's interesting that Dalrymple comes from a filmmaking background. Does that influence how he presents history in the book?
Apparently, yes. He talks about sketching historical characters by focusing on their contradictions, making them more human and complex. And he explicitly says he sees history unfolding in scenes, much like a filmmaker would. He gives this really striking example concerning Jawaharlal Nehru. He describes Nehru initially as maybe a bit of an upper-class champagne socialist, not deeply radicalized. But then Dalrymple recounts the scene where Nehru witnessed General Dyer, the man responsible for the Amritsar massacre, casually discussing the idea of wiping Amritsar off the face of the planet. According to Dalrymple, witnessing that sheer brutality and casual disregard for Indian lives fundamentally changed Nehru, radicalized him. Framing it as a scene makes that turning point very powerful.
That really drives home the point, doesn't it? How seeking out these different perspectives, especially the personal, often unheard ones, can completely shift our understanding of major historical events and the people involved, makes you question the standard textbook versions. Absolutely. For our final deep dive today, let's explore the fascinating and somewhat contested legacy of a global art icon, Frida Kahlo. We'll look specifically at how she's viewed in her home country, Mexico, compared to the almost ubiquitous image we see of her on merchandise worldwide.
Right, and a great place to start understanding this is La Casa Azul, the Blue House, which was Kahlo's home in Mexico City and is now a museum. Visiting it gives you these incredibly intimate insights into her life. You see her childhood photos, personal letters, the famous bed with the mirror overhead so she could paint self-portraits while recuperating from injuries. You see her actual medical braces, the special shoes she wore because of her polio-affected leg, and of course her paintings, including those dealing very directly with her physical suffering, like her miscarriage. But beyond the pain, you also see her vibrant life, the colorful kitchenware, her collection of pre-Hispanic sculptures, these unique papier-mâché Judas skeletons, even her wheelchair positioned near her easel. It grounds her in her Mexican identity and her life with Diego Rivera.
Her life story is undeniably compelling, that mix of intense pain and passion. Childhood polio, then that horrific bus accident when she was a teenager, leading to chronic pain and over 30 surgeries. And then her turbulent relationship with Diego Rivera, the famous muralist. Marked by infidelity on both sides, his affair with her own sister must have been devastating. And her own rumored affairs, too, with figures like Leon Trotsky, and potentially women as well.
So, given this dramatic life and powerful art, how do Mexicans themselves see her compared to this global phenomenon she's become? The article interviews Lorena Vasquez, an archaeologist and guide at the museum. She suggests that maybe Mexicans weren't prepared for the sheer scale of Frida's international fame, especially how it exploded after Madonna bought one of her paintings. Suddenly, in the global eye, Frida seemed to eclipse even Rivera. For Lorena, though, the focus is on Frida as a strong, powerful woman who absolutely lived life on her own terms, challenging the conventions of her time.
But that's not the only view presented, is it? There's a counterpoint.
Exactly. The article also includes the perspective of Hector Vasquez, who is Lorena's husband. He actually considers Kahlo an overrated artist. His view is that her massive fame owes more to the drama of her life, her association with the already famous Rivera, her accident, her unconventional lifestyle, rather than to, pure technical skill or groundbreaking artistic innovation in the way maybe Rivera had.
That's quite a different take. How do art experts respond to that kind of critique?
Well, the article brings in art experts like Aprahita Jain and Alejandro Martinez Gallardo who push back against that narrow view. They argue that art isn't just about technical brushwork, it involves higher intellect and artistic expression. Gallardo specifically highlights Kahlo's technical sophistication, arguing she was skilled, but also emphasizes the raw emotional power in her work. She points to Kahlo's unique fusion of surrealist ideas with traditional Mexican folk art styles. And crucially, they stress her unflinching exploration of complex themes: identity, gender, the body, pain, both physical and emotional. Gallardo notes that these themes are precisely what resonates so strongly with many young Mexicans today, who connect deeply with her honesty and defiance.
So it really sounds like there's no single version of Kahlo that everyone agrees on. The world seems to embrace her as this powerful symbol, while within Mexico there's still this ongoing conversation, maybe even debate, about the woman herself versus the global legend.
Absolutely. Which leads perfectly to a final thought for you, our listener, to mull over. When any historical figure becomes such a massive global symbol, what aspects of their actual complex identity and their original cultural context inevitably get amplified or focused on, and what other parts might get diminished, simplified, or even distorted in that process of becoming an icon?
Thank you for listening. If today's episode gave you something useful, consider following us on Spotify so you're the first to hear the next one. You can give suggestions by contacting on Twitter handle given in the episode description. We are always eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.